in a great, endless universe where life is so rare.
We're surrounded and protected by a layer of air.
On a planet of wonder, made of oceans
And lands.
Whose future rests in all of our hands.
its surface is covered in wonderful things
That walk and talk and think and swing. With lizards and plants and fishes and birds. And insects and mammals.
that travel in herds.
It's a land full of trees that reach for the sky.
With birds, bats and bugs. Flap their wings and fly.
Where armies of ants form nice tidy lines.
As they march across forests
And fungus and vines.
Where colourful creatures of all shapes and sizes.
live out their lives.
As the sun sets and rises,
Some sleep in the day and come out at night.
While others prefer to play when it's light.
Where raindrops make rivers that flow to the sea.
So that creatures of all colours can roam far and free.
Where web-footed critters paddle and play.
As wave after wave rise and fall every day.
In an endless universe where life is so rare. There's a precious planet and wild things share. It's a place of wonder filled with colourful lands. And its future health rests in our powerful hands.
Well, welcome everyone. Your Excellency, Mr. Carlos Abad, the Ambassador of Ecuador and Deputy Head of Mission, Minister of IO. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Durrell Annual London Lecture. My name's Leslie Dickey, and I have the pleasure of being the Chief Executive of Durrell, and welcome to what is one of our favourite nights of the year. Now, tonight we're going to be speaking all about islands, why islands are important. But I'd like to start by thanking you all, first for coming along here this evening, because this is you supporting us. Some of you are our members, you're our donors, our supporters through many different ways, and we really appreciate that trust that you have in us, because that's how we see it. You trust us to save species from extinction, and I hope this evening we're going to show you exactly how we're doing that and to assure you that your trust is well placed. So just to give you a little flavour of the evening, I'm going to do a brief introduction to why islands are so important to us. And then I'm going to hand over to our sponsors, because we also have very generous sponsors who make evenings like this possible. So I'm going to hand over to our colleagues from Rathbones Greenbank Investment for them to say a few words about why they're involved. And then we're going to go over to the Galapagos, and we're going to hear from our speaker, Monty Halls, the newest Durrell ambassador. Then we're going to go a slight detour, the opposite side of the world, and we're going to hear from Nik, who heads up our work in Mauritius. So some of you might have been here last year, this time a year ago, when we launched our strategy, Rewild Our World. So I'm going to give a quick recap on what that strategy was about. Now, we've always had the mission of saving species from extinction, but we added a vision statement of how we want to see the world. And what we want to see is a wilder, healthier, more colourful world. Now, alongside that beautiful vision, we also have to put some hard targets. How are we going to do that? What do we want to do? And we also have to set a date, give ourselves a date at which we are going to get some of these very tough targets achieved. And in 2025, our founder, Gerald Durrell, would have been 100 years old. So 2025, We want to see 10 ecosystems being rewilded. We want to see 100 threatened species on the road to recovery, 500 endangered species programs working more effectively, and by that we also mean colleagues in other organizations through our training work. We want to have conservation in its widest sense to be the most effective it can be. And we want to connect 1 million people better to nature. And when we say that, we mean we're going to measure it. This is not just a random statement. We are really going to measure if we can better connect people to nature. Now, our whole strategy is called Rewild Our World. So, rewilding. Let's remind ourselves what rewilding means. Rewilding is not just putting species back. Rewilding is about building healthy, resilient ecosystems. And we approach it in a particular way. We want to recover a threatened or missing species. Now, of course, that's Durrell's core strength. It's what we're known for. It's what we're going to continue to do into the future. But alongside that, we want to revive ecosystems. So really thinking about how ecosystems function, thinking about the processes that need to occur for ecosystems to be healthy. So what animals do we need to put back? What animals do we need to translocate? So we're thinking about the processes. Because eventually what we want to do, of course, is step back and take our hands off, and it will all function without us. That's the hope. And we want to reconnect people. Because we believe if we can reconnect people, it's good for all of us. It's good for our mental health, our physical health, it's good for society, it's good for the environment. Because once we're reconnected, we will take more responsibility for the world around us. It will be all our responsibility that nature is healthy and functioning and being looked after. So that's where we got to. But why islands? Well, we have 10 rewilding sites around the world, and we have global programs at various other sites around the world. But what is true to say is that they are disproportionately skewed towards islands. So from the great red island of Madagascar and Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, to Sumatra in Southeast Asia, across to the Caribbean in Montserrat and St. Lucia, and then Floreana Island in the Galapagos. At all these places, you will find Durrell projects and Durrell people. And of course, we are headquartered on an island, a small island in the Bay of Normandy called Jersey. So we were very much island people. The rhythm of islands is in our blood. So we have this concentration on islands. Now, islands are actually quite important symbolically in many ways. In literature, from Robinson Crusoe to Jurassic Park, that's Jurassic Park. You know it's real, right? You know it's real, okay. So, islands are symbolic of many things. Now, of course, there's an element of islands that we're frightened of. You know, we're frightened of being shipwrecked. We're frightened of being banished to islands. Islands can be dark, but islands can be something else as well. We're worried about being alone in islands, unless it's, of course, it's with the one you love. Honeymooners like islands. Islands are romantic, essentially. Sometimes a dark romance, but islands are romantic. So that's part of the psyche of islands, but what do we really want to do in terms of the conservation of islands? Why are we so keen on islands? Well, only 5% of the Earth's landmass is islands, but 20% of global biodiversity is found on islands. It's a very disproportionate amount. 37% of all critically endangered species are found on islands, and 61% of all known extinctions have occurred on islands. Islands are vulnerable places. Of that 61% of known extinctions, over 80% of those extinctions have been caused by alien invasive species. So species that were not meant to be there, that we've brought there, either deliberately or accidentally. So why? Why are they so vulnerable? Well, the species that have evolved on islands, they've usually evolved in isolation from, in particular, mammalian predators. So the seabirds that we find on islands, the reptiles, they're not used to having these voracious predators. And along we come, and we bring cats, and we bring rats, and we bring mice. And the species that have evolved on islands don't know how to cope with this. the predator animals that come onto these islands, these invasive alien species, they undergo what's called ecological release, and they devastate islands. They're so vulnerable. But they're also this, I talked about literature a little bit earlier. This is from the writer P.D. James, who said that every island to a child is a treasure island. And to us it is as well. Because of the biodiversity we can find on islands, because of that diversity that's so magical, we're really excited about islands. Now, this image is Floreana Island in the Galapagos. Amazing image. It looks like some abstracted Monet painting. Now, everywhere that we work, we never work in isolation. We always work with our partners, and we're delighted to say that on the Galapagos, we work with island conservation, we work with the National Park of Galapagos, and we also work with the Galapagos Conservation Trust, and our colleagues from GCT are here with us this evening, which is fantastic. So we have a joint vision for Floreana. Floreana has been heavily impacted by introduced alien species. So what we want to do is remove those predator animals and to restore the natural wildlife that would have been there. Now, Durrell's part of this is really around a few species, in particular species like the Floreana mockingbird and the racer snake, who are mostly now just found on the offshore islands, are very vulnerable. So we have a real role in restoring, recovering those species. The other island we're going to talk about this evening is Round Island. It's not round, it's the first lesson. There's a very round island off the coast called Serpent Island, which you'll see in Nik's talk. It is round. It's got no serpents, though. Very badly named. So Round Island is off the north coast of Mauritius. Of course, Mauritius is somewhere we've always had a long association. It's where, of course, the dodo was from, the symbol of Durrell, and it's our symbol to remind us that there should be no more dodos. Round Island, again, a place where we work with our partners, the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation and the government of Mauritius, namely the Parks and Forest Service. And on Round Island, I think I have to say, this is our own little Jurassic Park, because what we're trying to do is recreate an entire ecosystem. Now, that's a quite extraordinary thing to do when you think about it. Something that took millions of years to evolve, was devastated by introduced species, and we're now trying to put it back. So every day is a learning day on Round Island. But if we get this right, or even the things that we get wrong, this is a global case study of how you restore an entire ecosystem. And other conservation groups are watching us to see how do we do this? Because there's many islands around the world impacted heavily by loss of habitat, introduced species. And of course, not just on islands. Some of the lessons that we can learn here, we can apply anywhere. So it's a really key place. That's on Round Island. I had the pleasure of going there earlier this year. That's Quasimodo. She likes to hang around the field centre. That's a little field centre. Nik's going to talk more about the field centre and the importance it plays. It's a really amazing place, actually. We had a wonderful time there, and Nik and his team and our partners, they're there all the time doing extraordinary work. So there we have it, 2 islands separated by continents and oceans, Round Island and Floreana, but they both face the same problems, the same challenges. And this evening, what I hope we'll be able to do is demonstrate our vision of how we're going to work with our partners on both of these islands, and that you will feel able to support us as we go through this process of finding the best way to help these islands with our partners. So, just to reiterate again, the little format of the evening, you're going to hear from Monty and Nik as our main speakers. We're going to keep all the questions to the end, so that we will have the opportunity for questions and answers. Then we're also going to show you a small video, an animation about how we work and the Durrell Index and how we prove what we do is effective. And then I hope you can all join us for some drinks where you'll be able to speak to us more, ask questions. We've got quite a few of the Durrell team here. As we said, we've got our colleagues from Galapagos Conservation Trust here as well, so you'll be able to ask us more questions, find out a bit more about what we're doing. As I mentioned, evenings like this don't happen without generous sponsors. And so now I would like to hand over to Mr. John David, who's the head of Rathbones Green Bank Investment, to tell us why they're keen to support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. We're delighted to have the opportunity to sponsor the Durrell Lecture 2018. Rathbones' relationship with the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust goes back many years through our colleagues in Rathbone Investment Management International, who are fellow Jersey Islanders. And at first sight, it might seem slightly strange, or even, dare I say, suspicious, that an investment management company is sponsoring a lecture on conservation. Business and the environment are not often happy bedfellows. But at Rathbones, through the specialist ethical and sustainable investment focus of Rathbone Green Bank Investments, we've been at the forefront of investing in companies taking responsibility for their environmental and social impacts. And we are active in engaging with those companies who we feel do not take those responsibilities seriously. The world faces many challenges, whether population growth, biodiversity loss, the misuse of plastics, obesity, climate change, the list goes on. And of course, they are all in some way or other interconnected. And these big problems need big solutions. And there is a role for global financial markets in providing the capital and the creativity in helping us make human life on Earth more sustainable. At Rathbone Green Bank, we seek out those companies willing and able to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Our work extends from making investments in areas as diverse as environmental technology, or social housing, or healthcare, or education, to wider initiatives around the social and environmental issues that concern us and our clients. Over recent years, these initiatives have included our membership of the Carbon Disclosure Project's Forest Programme, through which we assess our investments' exposure to deforestation, our work to encourage more sustainable soy production, very much in the press at the moment, and our commitment to the Montreal Carbon Pledge, through which we measure and report the progress we are making in reducing the carbon impact of the portfolios that we manage. The aim of the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust to create more diverse, beautiful, resilient natural landscapes in which species can thrive and people can enjoy a deeper connection with nature resonates acutely with the aims of Rathbone Green Bank and our clients to drive positive change in the economy, society, and the environment through ethical and sustainable investment. Our support of events such as this brings the world of investment and conservation closer together, and that can only be a good thing. And I'm very much looking forward to being further inspired by our speakers tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So our first speaker tonight is a TV presenter, adventurer, marine biologist, former Royal Marine, generally enthusiast for all things to do with nature. And in fact, I've got to know Monty a little bit over this summer since he became ambassador, general enthusiast for everything. Monty came on board with us actually due to our colleagues at Rathbones and agreed very nicely to be an ambassador for us. Monty's going to talk about his experiences of the Galapagos. I'm sure some of you saw the TV series earlier this year, My Family in the Galapagos, which starred Monty and his family. And Monty, by a very lucky, lovely piece of serendipity, is also the president of the Galapagos Conservation Trust, our partners in the Galapagos. That's very nice as well. It brings us all even closer together. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Monty.
Thank you, Leslie. Honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for turning up to a wonderful venue for a wonderful evening. And I've got personally great memories of this venue. I ran an event here called Speaking Up for Heroes, where as an ex-Marine we tried to raise money for help for heroes, for wounded servicemen and women. And I got a young Marine that had just come back from Afghanistan. I said, just bring some kit and auction it off to everyone, see how much we could raise. And he held up a Union flag and he said, this flag flew off the back of my Bergen for the entire time I was out in Afghanistan. There are bullet holes in this flag. I used this flag, this Union flag, to staunch the wound of an injured colleague and save his life. And now I am auctioning it to you. And he held up this tattered Union flag and it went for 18 grand or something crazy like that. And afterwards I said to him, you didn't do that with all that flag, did you? And he said, no, I bought it yesterday and just stamped it into a puddle. So I do have fond memories of being here. And I'm very much delighted as well to be an ambassador for Durrell. And there's a wonderful initiative that Durrell and Rathbones are working with me towards next year about empowering the next generation, which I'm not allowed to talk about. I can sense Leslie's ears reddening and her glasses steaming up because I've been told I'm only allowed to talk about it a little bit. But it's very exciting. But it's for next year, and it's not for now. Because for now, I want to talk about islands, and I want to talk about the Galapagos in particular. So how did we end up on the Galapagos? Well, essentially, I run a production company as well. And I'd spent many years going around the world doing all sorts of ridiculous adventures. And one of those was making a film on the Galapagos Islands. And so this was sort of several years of globe-trotting, doing all sorts of ridiculous stuff. That shot in the lower right-hand corner there is a tiger shark biting into the front of our inflatable boat off the Great Barrier Reef, which became a deflatable boat. And we had to head to that beach at some speed behind us there, like, with an entourage of very interested tiger sharks. And I asked the Australian cameraman who took that photograph, how did you feel when you took that photograph? And he said, mate, if I'd had a large lump of charcoal clutched between my butt cheeks when I took that photograph, I'd now be in possession of the largest diamond on it. So having done all these many adventures for many years, I was really looking forward to going out and spending a bit of decent time in the Galapagos. And, you know, why wouldn't you? This extraordinary archipelago, 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador, on everyone's bucket list, one of the most important groups of islands in the world, the birthplace of evolutionary science, and a place like no other. There's about 13 islands of a size that could be lived on, but of those only 4 are inhabited, and a very, very special place indeed. And indeed, the waters around the Galapagos are unique as well. A marine nature reserve of 300,000 square kilometers, the 4th largest marine nature reserve in the world. 440 fish species, 40 of which are found only in the Galapagos. And that level of endemism, unique species, is very, very high throughout the archipelago. So I was really looking forward to getting out there, having spent many years going around the globe, doing sort of hairy-bummed, horny-palmed adventuring. I'm 51 now, and I'm 52 actually now, and I thought, do you know what? That's it. It'd be really nice just to go somewhere, do some decent science, relax, and be as one with the environment, this extraordinary environment that is the Galapagos. And go out there and practice tantric clenching and synchronize my chakras and whatever people do. But I also had the idea, why don't we make a TV series about it? Because it'd be really interesting to tell a story about the conservation work that's going on out there. Not just a documentary about the Galapagos, about the conservation work, about the local people and the challenges they face living in the islands. And Channel 4 said, yeah, great idea. But they came up with 2 slight problems. And there they are. My little girls, Isla and Molly, they said, look, why don't you go out with your family? And obviously I love my little girls to bits, but they're 5 and 3, and basically they're psychopaths because they're 5 and 3. They're ginger ninjas. And it always reminds me, whenever I'm around with the kids, that they love fighting, they love getting naked, they love mischief, they're always up to something, they're continually punching each other. It's just like living with 2 drunk Royal Marines all the time. So But nonetheless, I thought, oh, yeah, it's going to be wonderful. It's going to be this extraordinary experience with my family. And indeed, I thought an experience with the film crew as well. Because as I said, Sea Dog Productions, we went and filmed it. And this is a very trusted group of people for me. And I thought that would be a typical production meeting out there. And what's more, it would be an opportunity for me to bond with my children. How many dads get a chance to spend 3 months solid with their kids? So I had a slightly sepia-tinted view of this glorious period of family bonding. Now, anyone who's got little children knows what the reality actually is of taking 2 red-headed toddlers to a set of islands on the equator, and with where we were living, very little internet, no telly, etc., etc. And all I can say is that my wife and I are still married, but we bear the psychological and indeed physical scars of being out there with the kids. But nonetheless, obviously a wonderful experience. The other thing is that I have a certain idea of when we make these films, what an explorer should look like. You know, those cargo pants with the pockets on the legs, big boots, bandana, stubble. My girls had very different ideas of what an explorer should look like. So I basically did this entire exploration of this truly marvelous archipelago, this unique, exciting, glorious, wild place, accompanied by Anna and Elsa throughout the entire experience. Who I hasten to add, while they were out there, we grossly underestimate kids, of course, and their ability to travel and their ability to evolve and adapt. And what better place to watch something evolve than the Galapagos Islands? And, of course, they went full Game of Thrones while we were out there and turned into sort of feral little monsters. And this was when we were in Isabella. We were going out one of the extraordinary volcanoes in Isabella, and moles came crashing out of the undergrowth with a skull on the end of a stick. And I've no idea what that animal is, or indeed if it was alive when she found it. But there we go. But it's important, really important, to look at these islands through the eyes of a child. And the reason is that 40 years ago, the Galapagos were declared a World Heritage Site. 40 years, they were one of the first places to be declared a World Heritage Site. So what would the islands look like after 4 decades of the highest level of protection that we as a species can offer a place? What it means is we're custodians of these islands. All we're doing is handing them on to the next generation and the generation after that. So it's really powerful to actually see the islands through the eyes of a kid. And of course, for young people there, for anyone there, the animals there are sort of environmentally naive, I believe, is the biological expression. There's a rule, and a very good rule there, that you're not allowed 2 meters closer to any animal on the Galapagos. But sadly, no one tells the animals that. And this particular shot, the kids were playing in a rock pool on Isabella Island, splashing and shrieking. And about 200 meters away, this is a baby sea lion, was on the beach and just looked up, heard these young animals having a good time, and ran 200 meters across the beach straight into the rock pool and played with the kids for an hour or so. So I also must say very briefly, the kids were absolutely extraordinary out there, and really taught me how to travel well. They took everything in their stride and just marinated themselves in the environment. How often do we, as travelers of a certain age, we're very conscious of culture, we're conscious of not getting in the way, we're conscious of whatever. I remember Isla getting off the aircraft in Baltra Airport, and just like a little animal, she got off, stood on the tarmac, and put her hands on her hips and went, and smelled the air. All her senses came alive, and this strand of ancient DNA came thrillingly alive in her. And she was like, so this is the Galapagos, let's do it. So wonderful to see that in a young person. And there's a great quote, which is a Charles Darwin quote, actually. Attitude is the difference between an ordeal and an adventure. And they really taught me how to travel well, my kids, because everything for them was an adventure. And everything for myself and Tam with them was an ordeal. But there we are. So a wonderful perspective. Just one thing I just want to quickly show, that joyous thing, the reason that everything we talk about tonight is important, because we have to see it through the eyes of the next generation. What are we handing on to the next generation? We have a massive responsibility right now, right here, to try and do something positive for the next generation. Because to watch a young person get immersed in that environment and come alive was truly glorious. And there was one particular moment that really stood out for me. We were having breakfast on Isabella Island. Suddenly I looked down and I was like, where's Moles? Where's the 3-year-old, the little redhead? And I glanced over a sand dune, and there she was, in the wind and the waves and this wild setting, sugar white sand, this Pacific surf crashing onto a beach and basically made her go crazy, even crazier than normal. And she was dancing on the beach. And it was a great poem. It says, this desert flame, this pixie in the sand with dusty feet and painted skin burning to the moon with fire dancing from her wings. She dares the stars to fade till the jealous sun will rise again to cool the heat she's made. That's my Molly. So, we also had the big logistical challenge as well of moving between the islands. These are challenges the islanders face all the time, and obviously we're quite a large film crew as well, but we did have an opportunity to really travel throughout the archipelago and get a good pen picture of what was happening in the Galapagos and the pressures that the islands were under. And obviously, they're a remarkable place, and that goes without saying. So the proximity of the animals, these once-in-a-lifetime experiences that you have every single day there, and also just the nature of the wildlife there. Remarkably, 95% of the species diversity in the Galapagos is still there from when man first set foot on the islands in 1535. So the diversity is still there, and that's really rare in other islands where obviously the species diversity has been eradicated by the presence of man. Here there be dragons. It's a place where reptiles dominate the vertebrates. They're the large animals there. And so it's very easy to have unique experiences there. And this is a red-billed tropic bird, and obviously it's a stopping off point for lots of migratory birds as well, so varies throughout the year too. And what that means is people flock to the islands from around the world. And what that means is that the Galapagos face pressure, real pressure, and probably more pressure now than they've ever faced before. There's a wonderful expression by Jay Veron, who's a scientist who wrote a book about the Great Barrier Reef. He said, we are the most fortunate generation that has ever lived or ever will live. Now, obviously, we're the most fortunate generation that's ever lived because of all the things that we've got and healthcare and travel, et cetera, et cetera. But we're also the most fortunate generation that ever will live. Travel from now on will probably be more restricted. Environments will be less pristine. Resources will be limited. And so we have a huge responsibility, I think. We've had a great time. Our generation have had a great time exploring these places, but we've left our mark, and we've got a big responsibility to sort that out. There's another quote by Hemingway that says, today is just a day like every day has ever been, but what you do today can affect every day to come, basically. So I think the moment is now to try and do something about this. And one of the reasons the Galapagos are under pressure is just visitor numbers and also the number of people who are living on the islands now. It's about 30,000 people live on the Galapagos now. There's about 220,000, 200,000 or so visitors to the islands now. And obviously that puts pressure on the infrastructure of the islands and the wildlife of the islands. And there's also surreptitious pressure as well, which I'll come to in a moment. The islands are also under global pressure as well, the same global pressures that affect so many other ecosystems around the world. Now, that's been a well-publicized scourge and something that I think to a degree we're all addressing now. We're all very aware of it now. Now, I'm just going to briefly take you to the Antarctic because I want to show you, it's a really nice example of the other pressure that we bring to ecosystems like this. No one travels maliciously. No one travels thinking, oh, yeah, I really want to, I want to damage that place. But whenever we turn up, we have an impact, a surreptitious impact. That was, this was a trip to Antarctica that I led last year. A huge group of very motivated, very knowledgeable people, very environmentally aware, who all wanted to do the right thing. Now, you've got the direct interface with animals all the time, wherever you go, of course. And one of the things we were told to be wary of was the fur seals, basically. And what you need to do with a fur seal, if it comes at you, and they invariably do, is make yourself big, like that, and big and scary. And one of our American guests took that to extremes, I think. But the interesting thing is that we all travel as ecosystems in our own right. Every bit of Velcro, your shoes, the turn-ups to your trousers, everywhere you carry seeds. And you carry small things into these environments. And invasive species, essentially. And There was a study done in 2007, 2008, looking at people visiting the Antarctic. This is the Antarctic. And they found that they carried 2,600 seeds in their clothing over the course of one summer. Now, that's the Antarctic. It's tough for things to grow there. Imagine the impact in Galapagos. Well, we don't have to imagine the impact. That's taken on Floreana, and invasive species have had a huge impact there. But in the islands as a whole, 1,579 species have been introduced to the Galapagos. 1,476 are now established. 600 native species of plant. So that's native species, original species, and there's now 870 introduced species of plant. 46% have been brought in deliberately, things like oranges, avocados, etc., etc. 2015 to 16, there were 14,180 items confiscated by biosecurity at the airport. It's a big problem. The Ecuadorian government is doing everything it can to tackle that problem by creating biosecurity. But it's just an issue with the volume of people. That's what you tend to get. And that's why islands like Floreana are under such intense pressure. You've also got things like direct impact as well. This was a Chinese fishing boat that was apprehended while we were there, going through the islands. It had 300 tons of sharks in its hold, and it was sailing right through the middle of the archipelago, right through the middle of a World Heritage Site, and happily was apprehended by the Ecuadorian Navy. So you've got those slightly more direct impacts as well. But don't forget those sort of the more surreptitious side as well. Now, the reason tonight is important, really important, is what we found when we were there, and the reason we left so optimistic is we found extraordinary individuals doing incredible work there. There is a groundswell of enthusiasm amongst ordinary people in the Galapagos to say, not scientists in particular or conservationists, guides. This was a fantastic guide called Pablo who worked with us, to do something about it, to turn things around, to protect their islands. And you also had all the guides, everyone working with tourists coming in, who were running little initiatives, who were running programs to try and turn things around and protect the islands. But they really need support. They really, really do. And the work of GCT, Galapagos Conservation Trust, and the work of Durrell's supporting those organizations is their lifeblood, their absolute lifeblood. And the other thing you have is local people doing things like beach cleans. They are really, there's a huge movement. There's this motivated, driven, focused group of local people, large groups of local people saying we're going to do something about this. And they are guided by the programs that are running out there. Now on the island of Floreana, there's only 120 people who live on Floreana, but they've said, right, we're putting a marker down. We're going to rewild our island. We're going to try and get it back to the way it was and reintroduce iconic species, the Floreana mockingbird, but just generally turn the island around, which involves a huge change in lifestyle for them. They're making many sacrifices, and they need all the support they can get from people like GCT, from the scientists and the conservationists, and from Durrell. So that's why I think evenings like this are so significant. And I'll finish with a final quote, which is from Ralph Bickney's. It says, sustainability is about ecology, economy, and equity. And I'm optimistic. I think the Galapagos is finding that balance, but it can only really find that balance, I think, with the assistance of organizations like Durrell, GCT, and the hugely motivated Ecuadorian scientists and local people that live there. So thank you very much.
I said he was enthusiastic, didn't I? Thank you, Monty. That was absolutely brilliant. Give us a real flavour for the Galapagos. Next, we're going to do a quick scoot right around the world. And we're going to go to Mauritius, and more specifically Round Island, to the north of Mauritius. Our next speaker is Dr. Nik Cole, and Nik is the head of our programs in Mauritius. Nik's worked for Durrell since 2006, and for that entire time, he has been on Mauritius. He's actually been doing projects on Mauritius even longer than that. And you could say that the biodiversity of Mauritius is Nik's life's passion. Now, Nik is a reptile specialist, predominantly. He is incredibly well respected for his academic work, but more than that, Nik is a practitioner. He is getting out there and getting the work done, which is really good. For me, on Round Island, he stopped me falling in the sea, face planting onto rocks, generally getting myself in trouble. So Nik is very at home in the field where we work. Nick's going to be talking a bit about the challenges on Round Island, but also the solutions and the vision of what we want to achieve. Now, just to embarrass him a little bit, I'll also just say, we recently had a vote within Durrell to choose the member of staff who most embodied our values, and Nik won. So in an organisation... So you can imagine in an organisation like Durrell, where everyone is incredibly passionate about what we do, what Nik means to us in terms of his work, his commitment to the cause, and his commitment to this next island. Nik.
Thank you, Leslie. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I guess for the last 16 years, I've had the privilege to work on the islands around Mauritius, including Round Island. Now, Round Island represents one of the most long-term, important islands in terms of restoration for Durrell. Over 40 years now, Durrell have been active on this island. And we work very closely with our partners in Mauritius, the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation, and the government's National Parks and Conservation Service. Now, just to give you an idea of just how small this island is, if we look at where Mauritius is, it's about 900 kilometers to the east of Madagascar, somewhere behind one of these clouds. And as we've heard, many islands, like Mauritius, very remote, a really unique biodiversity evolves that's found nowhere else, not on other islands, because they just evolve in this one place. Now, Mauritius, this is Mauritius, is slightly larger than Greater London. It's a fairly small island, it's about 2,000 square kilometers. But over the last 400 years, the influx of humans and all the species that they bring with them has virtually devastated much of this unique ecosystem on Mauritius. And only the most difficult and most remotest places, predominantly the islands, have been spared or partially spared the influx of destruction. And Round Island is one of these places. So this is Round Island. It's about 22.5 kilometers to the northeast of Mauritius. And this is it. This is a volcanic plume of an island. It's just over 2 square kilometers. Very, very rugged, tough, and hostile terrain, at least for us. Has an elevation of about 280 meters. And it was once connected to mainland Mauritius, thousands and thousands of years ago. But as the sea levels rose, it actually trapped and held on to an important part of the Mauritian ecosystem that was eventually lost from the mainland. And more importantly, Round Island is one of the few islands, certainly within the Indian Ocean and also the world, that was never invaded by rats. Rats are a big, big problem for small islands, and very few endemic species that have evolved in isolation managed to survive. And because rats never got to Round Island, it managed to hold on to a lot of its diversity. Unfortunately, it didn't stay entirely mammal-free. In the early 1800s, mariners at the time, fearing that they might get shipwrecked on Round Island, released rabbits and goats. And these species virtually denuded Round Island. They ate their way through a lot of the saplings of the plants, which had destroyed the habitat, and we saw big declines in some of the species that relied upon those habitats. Fortunately, in 1976, Gerald Durrell visited Round Island, and he really brought the plight of Round Island, the problem of these mammals, but also the uniqueness of this small island onto the international arena. And I'll let you hear from Jerry himself on one of his trips coming onto Round Island.
Round Island lies 14 miles off the coast of Mauritius, and it's 370 acres in extent. But in that 370 acres, it's produced some extraordinary wildlife. Now, this is the 4th time that I've visited Round Island, and each time it's been a tremendous adventure. Of course, I mean, it's always an adventure going to visit an uninhabited island in the first place. But added to that is the fact that there's only one rock that you can land on, and you're never sure until you get there whether you're going to be able to because of the swell. And we're hoping today it's nice and calm. I think we're going to be able to do it. I hope so. Anyway, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. This is a much easier method of getting on shore than it used to be in the old days when you had to jump from the boat. But it makes you feel somewhat like a pantomime fairy. Now, what is the importance of this island? After all, it's 370-odd acres of volcanic tuff stuck out here in the ocean, miles away from anywhere. Well, there are two reasons why it's important. First of all, it's biology, because on this strange place have evolved no less than 3 species of lizard, 2 species of snake, and 2 species of palm tree, which are found nowhere else in the world. The second reason it's important is because it shows us how easily an ecosystem can be put out of equilibrium by interference by man. At one time, all the lower slopes of this island were covered with thick palm forest, and the top of it, the hump of it, as it were, was covered with hardwood forest of ebony and similar trees. But then, in the early 1800s, they introduced the rabbits and the goats, and now they have decimated the whole area. They go straight through a forest, eating up everything on the ground, which includes all the seedlings from the trees and the shrubs and bushes. So the forest never really gets a chance to live again. But I suppose it's a good thing that the rabbits weren't rats, because if they had been rats, there wouldn't be a single reptile left on the whole of Round Island.
So when Jerry was on Round Island, this was the state of the palm-rich or not-so-palm-rich habitat. Fortunately, soon after that video was taken, the goats were removed. They were removed by 1979, and rabbits later in 1986. And the removal of these 2 mammals had such a remarkable impact upon the island. And this is the same location a few years ago. The recovery of the palms has just been phenomenal on this island. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to take you on a tour around Round Island and really show you where we've got to in terms of the island's restoration and what the future holds in terms of restoring this unique ecosystem. So we're going to start by arriving at the same location that Jerry did in that video. And they're going to walk up through some of these really deep gorges, these gullies, up into some of the rich palm areas, and then out to the north of the island before heading up towards the summit, down into some of our really important areas where a lot of the restoration of forest, restoring this forest back to Round Island, before heading back down to our base camp. So this trip is about just over 2 kilometers round Round Island. So arriving, getting on Round Island, as we saw in that video, can be quite an adventure. There is only one spot, and this is the landing rock just in front of the boat here. But the crane and the winch that was used to get Durrell onto Round Island was placed there just before he went out and very quickly disappeared in the first storm that came through. Pretty much everything we've put on this landing rock to make it safer to get on, first cyclone comes along, it's gone. It just disappears. So we've given up and we've gone back to getting on straight from the boat rather than trying to go over by a winch. So we have a team of 3 wardens that work on the island. Each one of them is on for 1 month at a time on this island. And they rotate through, so we have 2 wardens with support staff on at any one time. And we have a changeover. We're helped with the National Coast Guard every 2 weeks. So most of the time, the seas are not as calm as this. And I'm going to show you a short clip of a typical changeover and just how interesting it can be.
Wait.
It can be fun. So yeah, after we've sometimes gone through very rough seas for about an hour and a half to get out to Round Island, we're faced with a landscape like this that we have to usually carry all of our items up to the field station. But coming up through these gullies really demonstrates how eroded this island is. And of course, with those mammals denuding the island of its vegetation, there was very little there to hold onto the soil. And by the 1970s, there's virtually no soil left on Round Island. And soil is really, really important. You can't restore an island without soil, basically. And we've found that the gullies are almost like the transport system. Whenever we get heavy rains, it washes all the sediment and just flushes it out into the sea. But we've had some success in trying to reduce this by planting pioneer plants around the tops of the gullies and also put in soil traps. And the soil is accumulating, but we need to really start reducing the erosion a lot more and also to accelerate this soil production. Basically, we need to have more plants, but planting without soil is quite difficult. And we also need to understand what the soil producers are, these detritivores and decomposers. So as we head further around the west coast of Round Island, we come into our palm-rich areas. And the palm is dominated primarily by one species, and this is the Latan palm. And since the removal of these herbivores, the population has increased from about 1,500 to 15,000. It's done really, really well. Had these mammals not been removed, we predict that there would have been only 1 or 2 individuals remaining on Round Island. And Round Island was the last place that you could find an intact Latan palm community. This area also supports 2 highly threatened palm species. One of these is the bottle palm. In the 1970s, there were only 6 wild individuals left. There were a few in nurseries on the mainland of Mauritius, but only 6 individuals. Through propagation and planting, collecting the seeds, planting them, and growing them on, and planting them out, we now have 362 on the island. And they're successfully regenerating. So it's looking very good for the survival of this species. Another palm is the hurricane palm, this one with a big spike in the middle. This got down just to 1 wild individual. In 2002, it produced its last fertile seed. Every year, seeds were being collected, and they started to be grown on the mainland in secure sites. And in the last couple of years, we've been bringing the offspring of those palms, they're very slow growing, and planting them out. And we've now got 10. It doesn't sound many, but it's a real achievement from just this one palm. So it's early days yet, but for the palm community, it is improving. And this palm, the recovery of the palm, has allowed the reptiles to really flourish. Now, reptiles are really important for Mauritian ecosystems. They're predators, prey, pollinators, and seed dispersers. And 7 species of reptile survived on Round Island. There were many other species, but 7 survived, and 4 of those became restricted to Round Island by the mid-1800s as rats got to other places of Mauritius. One of them was the Gunther's gecko, one of the largest geckos in the world. We also had large tail-fair skink, a night gecko, which was named after Gerald Durrell and Lee Durrell, Durrell's night gecko. But the top predator on this island was the keel-scaled boa. And by the 1970s, this snake was the rarest snake in the world. There's only about 60 or so individuals left. The recovery of this palmer, though, has led to more than a 2,000% increase in the abundance of the lizards. And this snake eats primarily lizards, so we've seen from 60 now to over 1,600 snakes. And because of these increases, it's allowed us to start moving these reptiles back to other islands where they used to occur, where we've removed the rats. We've started to bring these plants back, and it's allowed us to reduce the extinction risk of the species on Round Island. But Round Island reptile community also included other species, such as this little lesser night gecko. This is an adult gecko that when they're hatchlings are absolutely tiny and quite difficult to find. Over the next couple of years, we plan to bring this lizard back to Round Island and back into this reptile community. And we have other threatened reptile species that are right on the verge of extinction that we're restoring habitat on Round Island to be able to bring them back into this community. So as we head up to the north of the island, we get this fantastic view of Serpent Island, which Leslie mentioned at the beginning of the evening. Now, Serpent Island is another unique place. It's very rarely visited, and in fact, there's more people that have been on the International Space Station. I think it's about 10 times as many people than have set foot on this island. And it is difficult, and it is dangerous, and I have the scars to show it from getting on and falling off and getting back on again. But this island, because of its uniqueness, it's another site where rats didn't arrive, has some very unique animals. And by looking at Serpent Island, we can understand a little bit about some of the species that have been lost from Round Island. And one of them is this tarantula. It's about the size of my hand. It's unique to Serpent Island, not found anywhere else. And it's a true old world spider. It eats small reptiles, it eats small seabirds. And what we hope to do is to be able to bring this tarantula back to Round Island. With rabbits and goats, the vegetation was lost. And so we had these larger geckos, like the Gunther's gecko and the tailfair skink, and these large or macroinvertebrates would have been very exposed to heightened predation and would have been very quickly lost from the island. As we're restoring this habitat, we're restoring places for them to hide, for their spiderlings, for small insects to survive. So Round Island's invertebrate community, we know very little about. We know we've got about 400 species. Many of them are undescribed, but many of them are unique, like this stick insect, which relies primarily upon that latan palm. So had goats and rabbits not been removed, this invertebrate and many other species would have disappeared. And we need to describe, over the coming years, to describe this invertebrate community, to identify what functional species are missing from this ecosystem. What I mean by functional, it's the pollinators are crucial to us restoring some of the plant species on the island, but we need the pollinators there to allow seed production and for these plants to flourish. So as we turn to the north, it's quite a dramatic sort of landscape, especially when you're stood there, is the crater. Now the crater is a favoured site for Round Island's sort of internationally or globally important seabird community, which consists of 7 breeding species. This is a red-tailed tropic bird chick. But the reason I've got this photo here is that seabirds are really important for nutrient transfer. If you imagine you've got this rock in the middle of the ocean, there's not much that feeds it unless it comes from the sea. And so you need seabirds that are provisioning their chicks on an island to bring in nutrients through regurgitated fish, their feces, but also for chicks or adults that just do not survive that season. They effectively fertilize an island and bring in those nutrients. And with the protection of Round Island and the presence of wardens, we've seen an increase in the seabird populations. And for the red-tailed tropic birds, white-tailed tropic birds, and also wedge-tailed shearwaters, they're the most numerous populations within the Southwest Indian Ocean. We also have the only Indian Ocean population of Bulwer's petrel. But Round Island is really famous for this species, which is the Round Island petrel, a hybrid of 3 different other petrel species that breed on the island, the Herald, Kermadec, and Trinidad petrel. And Round Island is the only place in the world where you have this 3-way hybrid system for a vertebrate. It's very unusual and is the focus of long-term research. And over the coming years, we want to try and enhance this seabird community. We know we have missing species. And to start with, we hope to bring back, or entice back, or reintroduce the masked booby, which is restricted to Serpent Island for the region, for the Mascarene region, the region around Mauritius. So as we head to the summit, we encounter the majority of our giant tortoises. However, these are not Mauritian tortoises. The last Mauritian tortoise was actually observed on Round Island for the very, very last time in 1844. Soon after that, it went extinct. But tortoises are really important. They shape and maintain habitats through grazing, browsing, and also through dispersing seeds. So due to their importance, and after a lot of research, we introduced a closely related species. So this is the Aldabra giant tortoise from the Seychelles. And since 2007, we've introduced 764 of these to Round Island, and they're acting as our ecosystem engineers. They're going around grazing out all of the exotic plants which have been introduced by early visitors to the island. You can see here they're grazing out a lot of the grasses, which is exotic. If they're not doing this, these grasses grow, they overshadow the endemic plants, and they don't survive. But the endemic plants have co-evolved with tortoise herbivory and grazing, and flourish in the presence of tortoises. So all these clumps, little shrubs, these are very rare endemic plants that are being favoured by us putting tortoises onto the island. We have a lot of research looking at the impact of these tortoises, and what we need to know is what is the long-term impact for these tortoises in helping us rewild some of these systems on Round Island. So we now head down into some of our sort of core areas of forest restoration. Round Island, as Jerry mentioned in that video, had lost pretty much all of its hardwood species. There are only a few individuals left of 2 species. But reintroducing these lost plant communities is probably the most core, most important part of restoring an ecosystem by bringing those habitats back. And since 2002, we've planted more than 37,000 plants of 52 species, but 32 of those have been hardwoods that we've brought back to Round Island that were recorded historically, or that we can guess and understand whether it fitted in that ecosystem. However, when you've got little soil and burrowing seabirds, it's very difficult to get your plants to survive. This is a photo from 2007, and we found that if we started planting plants individually in these little pots, you see these little black cages, some places it improved survival, other places it didn't. And then we found, okay, we'll sort of target areas of shallow soil, but then it's got the risk of desiccation. So of these 37,000 plants that we've planted, overall, only about 21% survive. And this seems quite low, but it's certainly working. This is the same site 10 years later. And we're learning what works and what doesn't work and adapting our strategy to really try and boost our planting techniques and also to enhance survival. So over the last few years, we've got a lot of projects running on Round Island, and we've had a lot of projects historically trying to understand this system and what we need to do to really support the future of Round Island. And in the last couple of years, we've put together this vision. And this vision is to really sort of basically maximize the abundance and diversity of the native species within the region, to build resilience into that system so it's self-sustainable for many, many generations to come. And we also want to use it as a model so we can understand how we proceed with the restoration of other islands. We cannot turn back the clock. We cannot go back to a time when people didn't first arrive on Round Island, but what we can do start to create almost like a mosaic of different habitats to bring in that diversity. So areas of palm, areas of hardwoods. So we have this habitat for understory and also canopy species. Then areas of tussock grasses with tortoises wandering through, grazing out certain areas that really favor some of the really threatened herbaceous plants. And then all of these habitats really support a rich diversity of invertebrates, reptiles, and seabirds. So as we head down to our base camp, basically our vision for Round Island would not be possible without a place to work from. This is our field station on the right here. It was built in 2002, and it's really small. It's only 8 by 4 meters in size. It sleeps 4 people, although at a push, we can get 2 people in the shed, just up here. So, yeah, this field station has a small store, has a kitchen, and a small veranda, and it's lovely sat on the veranda in the evenings. Tents don't last very long on the island. It's a very harsh climate. They can last, brand new tent could last maybe 2 days. If you're lucky, maybe up to sort of 6 months or so. Normally, if we're too many people on the island, we just sleep out on the rocks, and you're usually woken up in the morning by a tortoise coming to say hello. Our kitchen table is multi-purpose. It's our office, our laboratory. It's a place where we measure snakes, for example, or pit tag them. And it's used for many other things besides just sitting down and having some food. Being completely off-grid, the station is run on solar power. The roof of the field station and also the shed collect rainwater, which we filter and drink. Water for washing is at a premium. Basically it's rationed. You have a certain amount that you can use per day, and it's about half a litre, so a cupful to have a shower with. We have a lot of dams across the southern slopes of the island to collect rainwater, and lots of storage tanks, but the priority for that water are the plants, and the plants in our nursery. This is the wardens from last week when we were on Round Island, basically caring for the plants that we bring onto the island, but also collect from seeds as well. So on an annual basis, we propagate and grow on about 1,500 plants of numerous species, and some of them, highly, highly threatened. We have one plant in this nursery that's now extinct in the wild. It does very well in our nursery, but not so well when we plant it out. And we're learning some of the techniques to actually get that out. So prior to planting, we have to harden them. We have to get them used to Round Island's conditions. They've had this lovely environment in our nursery, being looked after by the wardens. And if we just put them out there, they're too soft. They don't last very long. So we have to very gradually, every day, taking them out, giving them a bit of sun, letting them expose to the wind before we can actually put them out. But it makes a big, big difference. And then we plant usually in the rainy season. And each plant has its own identity tag, and we follow it for a year and water it every week, remove weeds from around it to try and improve that survival. So our field station and our facilities have served us incredibly well over the last 16 years, but with our new vision, and we really want to step up the rewilding of Round Island, we need to improve our infrastructure. And recently we've been looking at, we need to increase the number of people out there to work. With just 3 wardens, 2 out there at any one time, and a couple of other staff, it's a lot of work. So we put plans together for this new field station where we can sleep 10 rather than 4, and we don't have to force people into the shed. And then also a dedicated workspace, so we're not working on the kitchen table, and also to have a quarantine room. And as Monty was saying, and Leslie was saying, the problems of people visiting islands, even ourselves, going out there, we need to make sure that we are not introducing anything that should not be on Round Island. So I'm going to show you just how important the infrastructure is and how it is really at the heart of our, there should be a video playing. There we go. So you can see our field station and infrastructure really is in almost like the heart shape of Round Island. I'm not sure if you can see it there. And to be able to make our vision work, we need this heart to pump a lot harder, and we need that support from others to be able to help us do this and help us achieve our vision of really, truly rewilding Round Island, this secure and very unique place in the Indian Ocean. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Again, extraordinary. It's an extraordinary place. I got to go there earlier in the year, and it really is amazing to see the work that's going on. So we've just got a few more things to do. This is a Floreana mockingbird, very beautiful species. This is the part of the evening where I say, lock all the doors, we're going to do the ask. There's no escape. So you've heard a lot this evening about the kind of work that we're doing on islands and the challenges we face. And of course, we can't do that work without our supporters, without the people who invest in us. And it is in a form of investment. You're taking your funds, investing them in us, putting your trust in us that we will do the right thing. And so I want you to consider ways that you could continue to help us, large and small, because it really does make a difference. No matter what it is, it really does make a difference to how we are able to undertake our work. For example, £10, we can help train the local people in Floreana. You know, Monty talked about how engaged the local people are. They're already primed. They already want to work towards helping their own environment, and we can help provide the training. £50 is a pair of binoculars. You know, the basic things that we need to undertake the work. It seems very straightforward, but if it costs money, it's a challenge. £600 make a week's worth of our conservation project on Floreana happen. £10,000, that's a 4x4 for the island's recovery team in Mauritius. £60,000, that builds the accommodation block that Nick was talking about. Now, I've been in that little accommodation block as it is now. Just before I went to sleep, we found a scorpion. And then I spent much of the evening not asleep because I kept feeling things running over me. I thought, I'm not going to look. But there was 4 of us lucky enough to be in the little accommodation block, and then the rest of the team were outside. I think Nick was sleeping on the helicopter pad. So you can imagine that this seems such a basic thing. Decent shelter, decent areas to work. It makes a real difference to how we're going to achieve our vision. So that's the ask for the evening. So I want you to think about, could you help contribute to some of these targets that we have? Help us make the work that we do even more effective. So I'm going to release you in a moment to have drinks outside with us. I hope you can all stay for that. All of us are around. There's lots of the Durrell team up here, Durrell team there, team from GCT. We're all able to answer questions. But just before you go, we're going to show you a little animated video which was made by the help of students at the University of the West of England. And it was narrated by the TV presenter, comedian, musician, Alexander Armstrong. And it tells you a little bit of how our work happens and how we measure it, and that's how we know it really does work.
Conservation works. But how do we know? This is the Round Island boa from Mauritius. In 1975, there were only 50 left. Now, thanks to Durrell and our partners, there are over 1,400. This is just one example of the many species Durrell has helped. But how do we know it's conservation that's making the difference? Well, scientists collected lots of data in the field. We analysed the data and used the IUCN Red List to assess just how close to extinction these species are. Then we created the Durrell Red List Index. The results were remarkable. With no conservation, the graph would have looked like this, with species declining over time. However, As a result of conservation, the graph now looks like this. It shows our species are moving away from extinction. This is fantastic news. In the last 30 years, Durrell has helped to move 14 target species away from the edge. The Red List Index is proof that conservation works. But there is still so much more to do. Saving species takes time. But with your help, we can do more. Join us, and together we can continue to save species from extinction.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming along this evening. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us.